Dylan Landry was never lucky. Dylan always had a hard time. When he was only a baby, he was abandoned by his dad. His mom died while giving birth, but this was not the cause of his dad's hatred towards him. Tom didn't like him because, well, he was not a normal boy. Now, Dylan wasn't sick. He wasn't evil, but his dad couldn't even look at him. He was ashamed and also scared by his appearance. Even though Dylan had the face of an angel and most of his body looked normal, there was something about him that couldn't go unnoticed. Dylan's arms were not like most arms, they were unique. His arms are even difficult to describe, for this world has never seen anything like that. When you think about a demon or a scary creature, well, that's what Dylan's arms look like. His arms were very big and filled with muscle. You could see his veins constantly pumping. They were also longer than your average arms. He had 5 fingers as well, but his fingers were long and in a different shape. His nails were also long and sharp. They were more similar to claws. As soon as Tom saw his son, he knew there was something wrong with him. Tom took baby Dylan, grabbed his car, and drove to a neighbor town where an orphanage was located. Now, the orphanage, well, it was ruled by nuns. He then gave Dylan to one of the nuns called Sister Bertha, claiming that Dylan was not his son, that he was the son of a demon that had impregnated his late wife. The nuns and the rest of the personnel were in awe. They accepted to stay with Dylan so that they could help him and study him more. Tom left the orphanage as soon as the nuns took Dylan, and he renounced to have any ties with the baby. The nuns knew a little bit better than Tom. They knew that Dylan was not the son of the devil. However, they thought his appearance was a curse. And along the priests, the nuns tried to pray and do many sacred rituals for Dylan, but nothing could help change his appearance. Eventually, they stopped this and just accepted it. Nevertheless, kids aren't as nice and understanding. The other kids in the orphanage either hated and bullied little Dylan or were too afraid of him, and that led the nuns to separate him from the other children. They claimed that everyone would benefit if Dylan was no longer there, and that there was no place to keep him. But Sister Bertha, well, she had mercy and wanted to look after him, so she took him under her care. She lived in one of the biggest chambers and ordered one of the workers to divide her chamber in 2. Dylan moved in his new chamber where he was separated from the rest of the kids most of the time. Years passed and Dylan was 12 years old. He was a kid just like any other, with the exception that he was very lonely. His only friend was Sister Bertha. As a kid, he wanted to spend time and play with the other kids, though this didn't happen very often, and only during school hours. Dylan would have classes with the rest of the kids for 6 hours a day, including breaks, and afterwards, he would go back to his chamber or to the nuns' private library, and would spend the rest of the day there. Most of the kids that were there during that period of time at the orphanage were afraid of Dylan with the exception of a class bully, Albert, and his friend. They constantly mocked Dylan and threw things at him such as leaves, insects, or food. They usually called him names as well, but one day, things turned around. One morning at exactly 10 a.m. during the school break, Albert and his friend decided to go torment Dylan. He would normally ignore these comments, but that particular day, there was something that triggered him. And Albert said a very mean comment, among the lines of, "You're so ugly, your mom couldn't take it and decided to die." Well, this poor taste of comment was the final straw for Dylan, who then raised his hand and directed it toward Albert. His massively long fingernails ended up cutting Albert's jugular, causing him to bleed out in a matter of minutes. The people who witnessed this, well, they were terrified. Everyone wanted him out. Sister Bertha, along with a couple of other nuns, claimed it wasn't Dylan's intention, for he only meant to punch him, but then couldn't control his big arms and claws. Though no one could understand, and they kicked Dylan out of the orphanage. Luckily, Sister Bertha's kind soul had mercy once again. She was fond of Dylan and loved him as her own child. And so she quit her life as a nun to go and live with him somewhere else. Both of them traveled around for a couple of weeks. Dylan used a cape and long sleeves to hide his arms, and eventually Bertha found a place to stay. An old lonely farmer decided to give them jobs in his farm. Dylan and Bertha would look after him and do all house and farm chores. In return, the old man would let them stay at his place and gave them some cash. The old man was aware of Dylan's condition, but he simply did not care. In fact, he put Dylan in charge of the farm because it was easier for Dylan to slaughter and butcher the animals for sale. And after a couple of years, the old man passed away, leaving his property to Dylan and Bertha. The two of them lived alone and were successful for some time. Bertha would deal with the people by selling them meat, and Dylan would work in the farm. No one ever saw Dylan, so there was no one to bother him or discriminate against him. By the time Dylan was 22, Sister Bertha got very ill. She passed away and left Dylan alone in this world. He buried her in the back of the farm. He was so full of sadness and sorrow. But at least he had a home and a job. He kept looking after the farm and waited for people to come and buy some meat. And a couple of days after Bertha's death, someone knocked at the door. It was Suzanne, a middle-aged housewife who enjoyed gossiping more than anything else. Dylan made sure to wear long sleeves and a cape before opening the door. While attending, Suzanne kept on asking questions about Bertha. Dylan answered, saying that he was Bertha's son, and that she had passed away. Suzanne, who examined Dylan from head to toe, gave him condolences. But when Dylan handed her the meat, she couldn't help but see the young man's arms. She didn't mention anything, and left the farm with a smile. Dylan felt a relief. He was happy that someone wouldn't be scared of his appearance, and started picturing how his life would be running business and, who knows, maybe even finding a significant other. Unfortunately, his joy didn't last too long. The same night, a furious horde arrived to the farm. Apparently, Suzanne had gossiped with the town that Dylan had killed Bertha. She claimed that she even saw Dylan eating Bertha's corpse. She told everyone he was a monster, and that he also tried to attack her. The whole town went to the farm with the purpose of killing Dylan. They carried pitchforks and stones, and they planned to even set the farm on fire. Dylan came out of his house to present himself to the horde, where he was met with 1,000 obscenities, and they called him a murderer, amongst other things, and tried to attack him. Dylan ran away as fast as he could. Though it was difficult, he managed to escape from the furious horde. And eventually, they gave up and went to their houses. Little did they know, they hadn't seen the last of Dylan. It took him a couple of days to properly recover, since the people had thrown stones and basically everything they could at him, so he was a little hurt. But the third night after the attack, exactly at midnight, he came back to his village. But he was now a different man. A man who was fed up with this world, who wanted revenge for all the injustices he had witnessed. And no matter how hard he tried to adapt, to be nice, or even to hide from people, he was always found out, and they would always see him as a monster and a freak. And he had had enough. If a monster is what they want, then a monster is what they shall have, he said as he took advantage of the dark of the night to set the village on fire. Burning the village was a rather easy job, since there were only 30 houses around the town, and only about 100 inhabitants. Dylan had stared at the chaos that he had created from a distance. He was far enough not to get hurt, but not that far just so that people couldn't see him and his wicked smile. He wasn't ashamed of his body anymore. He wasn't wearing a cape or long sleeves this time. He was revealing his pale, naked torso, and his reddish, almost demonic-looking arms. Many people, including Suzanne, died that night, and curiously, only the good and innocent ones survived the flames. He then left the village, but wasn't completely over with his revenge. He decided to go to an old destination. The orphanage. He walked mile after mile until he finally got to his old town where the orphanage was located. But it was daytime and he was tired. He decided to wait nearby and hoped to recover some strength in the meantime. And once it got fully dark and he noticed most lights in the buildings were off, he knew everyone was sleeping, and it was the perfect time. Despite seeking revenge, he wasn't going to hurt everybody, only those who have hurt him. To his advantage, he knew the place very well, and he knew each chamber belonged to each nun. There were 4 people he had in mind. The other 2 nuns and the rest of the kids and workers would be safe. He carefully got to each room and killed them one by one. The first and second ones were killed while they were still asleep in their beds. The third one was killed as he entered her room, and the fourth and last one was the one who kicked him and Bertha out of the place. The one who always looked at him with disgust. Well, Dylan killed her slowly and violently in the library, and then was placed in the orphanage chapel for everyone to see. Dylan wasn't going to burn this place. He knew there were innocent people around. Nevertheless, he did spend some extra time looking for something very important. He knew the orphanage kept the reports on each kid. The reports had all the details about the kid's background story before the orphanage, including who had brought them or where they were found, and details about family member or known person for those who did have family. He never knew anything about his background story, for he was never told so. It wasn't a surprise that he was very overwhelmed to find out that his own father was the one who got rid of him. He also read in the report all the things his father said about him before handing him to the nuns. He didn't take it too well. He grabbed his report and some other things such as money, drinks, and clothes, and food, and headed to the address he found in the report. It didn't take Dylan long to get to his father's town. The problem was to find the address. It must have taken him 4 hours until he finally found it. By the time he found the house, it was already 8 in the morning, and as he was determined to enter the house, he stopped and was surprised when he saw a little boy and woman leaving the house. Well, his initial thought was that the house was no longer his father's, and he was ready to leave when he heard the woman screaming his dad's name. Then, a big man in his late 40s opened the door and handed a school bag to the happy kid as he kissed the woman on the lips. Dylan understood they were Tom's new family, but instead of feeling any remorse whatsoever, he was even more determined to keep with his plan. After the woman and the kids left in their car, Dylan opened the house door with his giant claws. Tom was in the kitchen preparing a coffee, and as he heard the noise, he grabbed one of the kitchen knives. Dylan started to look all over the house for Tom until he finally found him. Tom looked surprised and anxious at first as he held the knife high, but after Dylan took off the top part of his clothes and revealed his arms, Tom started laughing. "What sort of joke is this?" Tom asked as he put down the knife. "Are you my father?" Dylan asked him. "No, I'm not," Tom answered. "I could never be the father of a monster. I don't have any idea who fucked your mother so that such a sad creature such as yourself was conceived," he added. And that last statement definitely revealed that even if Tom was denying to be Dylan's father, he still knew who Dylan was. "Why did you give me away?" Dylan asked as he cried. "Oh no, don't come at me crying like a little girl. I thought you were at least tough, ever since you killed that other guy," he said, referring to the time Dylan accidentally killed Albert. Dylan couldn't take it anymore. He tried to attack Tom, but he defended himself. However, Dylan was stronger, and all he needed to do was use his arms properly, and ripped out his heart. Tom got a second or two to see it quiver in Dylan's hands before collapsing dead in a pool of blood on the floor. After killing Tom, he tried to kill himself, and after all, he didn't have anything else to live for. Dylan grabbed one of the kitchen knives and tried to slash his own throat, but something magnificent happened. It wasn't working. He then tried to stab himself in the heart, but even if the knife was well in him, he wasn't dying. Instead, his skin regenerated quickly this time, looking red, almost matching the red of his arms. And that's when Dylan realized maybe Tom was right, and he was no human after all.